Now again, this problem is not in standard form, but in order to make it be in standard form, we have to get rid of those parentheses. So the first thing we're going to do is FOIL or distribute. We'll take this x times both of these over here. So x times 7x is 7x squared. And then x times a negative 1 is a minus x. Here we'll take 5 times both of those. So 5 times 7x is 35x. And then 5 times a negative 1 is a negative 5. And we'll just copy the rest of that equation. Let's combine our like terms on the left-hand side before we go any further right here. So we have 7x squared plus 34x minus 5 equals 32x plus 4x squared. Now I want the right-hand side to be equal to 0, so I'm going to move those terms. This is plus 32x, so I'm going to do a minus 32x. And I'm going to write it over here under the x. At the same time, I want to move this 4x squared, so I'll subtract it. I'm going to write it underneath the other x squared. And that will cancel out both of these, leaving me the 0 that I want on the right. And over here, that leaves me 3x squared plus 2x minus 5 equals 0. Now I'm ready to factor. There's not any greatest common factor, so I take a times c, and I get negative 15. So I'm trying to multiply to get negative 15 and add to get 2. So if I look at my negative 15, that's 1 and 15, 3 and 5. I want my smaller number to be negative. So there's my numbers right there, 3 and 5, negative 3 and 5. So I'll put a over each of those numbers. So 3 over negative 3 gives me 1 over negative 1. And that's an x after the top. So that will give me my first one, x minus 1. And then I'll put the 3 over 5. Can't reduce it. So x on the top. That gives me 3x plus 5 equals 0. Now I need to set each of those equal to 0. I'm going to erase my factoring work to give me a little bit more room. So first of all, I'll do this x minus 1. X minus 1 equals 0. Add 1 to both sides, and I get x equals 1 as my first answer. Then I'll have this 3x plus 5 equals 0. Subtract 5 from both sides, which gives me 3x equals negative 5. And then divide by 3. So I get x equals negative 5 over 3. This again is not in standard form, so I'm going to make it be in standard form. I'll need to subtract w from both sides, so I'm going to put it under the other w. And then I need to add 2 to both sides, so I'll put that under the 47 like terms. That gives me 0 over here, so I have w squared plus 14w plus 49. So now this is a trinomial. There are no greatest common factors, so I take 1 times 49 and I get 49. So I need two numbers that multiply to get 49 and add to get 14. Well, the only two numbers, well, we could have 1 and 49 and 7 and 7. Those are our only two options. This is all positive, so we don't have to worry about any negatives, and clearly we have 7 and 7. So I put 1 over 7, w on the top, and 1 over 7 with a w on the top, which gives me w plus 7 times w plus 7 equals 0. Now I can set that equal to 0, subtract 7 from both sides, and I get w equals negative 7. Now if I did it for this other piece, I would obviously get the same thing because I started with the same thing. So there are two answers there, but when we write it into our answer spot on our homework, we only write it once because it's repeated. It's called a double answer. Same answer 2 times, but we only write it once. So this one is already equal to 0. It's already in standard form, but there is a greatest common factor. All of those numbers can be divided by 2, and they all have an x. So I'm going to write a 2x out in front. Now if I take a 2x out of here, I'm just left with an x squared. If I take a 2x out of here, I'm left with a 14x. And if I take a 2x out of here, I'm left with 45. So now I need to factor this part. It's a trinomial. Now there's not any greatest common factor, so I have 1 times 45 is 45. I need 2 numbers that multiply to get 45 and add to get 14. So in 45 I have 1 and 45, 3 and 15, 5 and 9, 6 doesn't work, 7 doesn't work, 8 doesn't work. It's all positives, all pluses. So here's my pair right here, a 5 and a 9. So I'd have 1 over 5 and 1 over 9 with x's on top. So I'd have x plus 5 and x plus 9. This 2x that was out in front stays out in front, and it's equal to 0. Now I have 3 factors, and each of them gets set equal to 0. So I start with 2x equals 0, and then I would need to divide both sides by 2, and that gives me my first answer of x equals 0. Then I would take x plus 5 equal to 0 and subtract 5 from both sides, and that leaves me with x equals negative 5 as my second answer. Then I'd take x plus 9 equals 0, subtract 9 from both sides, and that leaves me x equals negative 9 as my third answer. My biggest exponent here was a cubed. This is not a quadratic equation, it's a cubic equation. But that 3 as the highest exponent tells me I really need 3 answers. One more. Again, this is not in standard form, so we need to distribute that x first to get rid of the parentheses. And then I need to subtract 20 from both sides so that it's equal to 0. So that gives me x squared minus 8x minus 20 equals 0. It's a trinomial in standard form, no greatest common factor. So I take 1 times a negative 20, and that's negative 20. So I need 2 things that multiply to get negative 20 and add to get negative 8. So if I look at 20, I have 1 and 20, 2 and 10, 4 and 5, and that's our options. We want to multiply to get a negative number and add to get a negative number, so our bigger number needs to be negative. And here's my pair here, a 2 and a negative 10. So I put 1 over 2 with an x on top, and 1 over negative 10 with an x on top. So I get x plus 2 and x minus 10 equals 0. And now I can solve those 2 smaller equations to find my 2 answers. Start with the x plus 2 equals 0. Subtract 2 from both sides. That gives me x equals negative 2 as my first answer. Then if I do the x minus 10 equals 0, I'll add 10 to both sides, and that leaves me with x equals 10 as my second answer.